marami ng mobility studies and studies of transport issues in Metro Manila. But there was no, konti pa lang yung studies that really dealt with the poor. It's always the general population, etc. So we just want to have a baseline study of the transport costs of the poor and the vulnerable groups in Metro Manila. It's a sort of establishing where we should take off. At least we know the situation and then we can take it from there. Yeah, so next slide. So your study areas are three urban poor communities in Metro Manila, in Quezon City, and then the vulnerable groups included senior citizens, persons with disabilities, women, and BPO workers. Now, these were predetermined prior to the start of our research. So it is not part of our research to determine which area is poor and which are really the vulnerable, what makes them vulnerable. It's really a predetermined groups before the start. Next slide. So ito, vehicle ownership rate, we just would like to show here that vehicle ownership is generally very low among the poor communities. Well, this is expected. These are people at least less than 10% or less than 3% of the households own a motor vehicle. And most of these are actually two-wheelers or motorcycles. Now, these are trip generation rate per household. Trip generation means the number of trips that are being made and going to a household. So, the average household size is around 4.5, 4.6 in the study area. So, what we notice here, home-generated household trips are very low, an average of around 1.5 per household. It means sa 4 to 5 members na household, hindi lahat sila umaalis ng bahay. So, this is the significance of that. No? There is little movement. Unlike yung siguro middle income or the upper income, if you have a mother and father tapos may tatlong anak, most probably lahat yon umaalis ng bahay. So, they generate 5 home-generated trips, no? As compared to the poor families na marami yung stay-at-home lang. So, next slide. So person trip generation per area, ito we just multiplied this with the trip rate multiplied by the population. So we're still talking here of around, ilan ba yan? Mga 2.1 million person trips annually. Daily it's around from 1,300 to 10,000 per area. And next. Sige, you skip that slide. So distribution of household trips, home-generated trips per trip per post. So ano ba yung ba't sila umalis ng bahay? We can see here na yung to work is around 70% sa area H and then 25%. But generally, for all three areas, the necessity trips, yun lang ang ginagawa. Kumbaga, there is very less leisure trip. There is even less market trips, no? Which means hindi sila actually pumupunta sa malalaking palengke. They do their, yung pamimili nila sa mga tingi-tingi sa sari-sari store. And next slide. Now, distribution of total person trips per mode. Yung person trips po, bawa umalis ka ng bahay, you're going to work. No? So from home to work, that is one generated, home-generated trip. But kung ang tinake mo is from your home, you went to a terminal, tapos pumunta ka muna, nag-breakfast ka sa McDo, pumunta ka sa office mo. So that is actually 3-person trips, no? Just to understand the differences. So basically, ang sinasabi dito, walk is still the most used mode, no? Among the poor communities. Kasi if we know that the feeder modes to a jeepney, then the jeepney is the most utilized public transport mode or motorized mode. This means na, although I think this will be validated by those who have dealt with them, na because of the cost in transport, hindi na sila sumasakay ng tricycles o ng pedicab. They just choose to walk, to go to the jeepney terminal. That's why yung walk trip became so high. Yan. Okay, next. And then factors considered in mode choice, affordability. At the end of the day, it's how much you spend and how much you can spend that matters. Then the next slide is percentage share of transport cost to total income. So what is noticeable here is mas mababa yung share ng transport cost to total income rather than the share of transport cost to expenses. If you do a little mathematics, it will tell you that generally their expenses are higher than their income. Are living in debt. No? Parang ganun. So, yun yung ano nung dalawang slide, hindi lang namin na-compare. But in the paper, we actually did that comparison and made yun yung finding na very critical actually. Now, the non-quantifiable costs, well, safety, exposure to pollution, these are given. And then the need to sacrifice other necessities to meet transport cost requirements. What is important to note here is, yung transport cost kasi is a derived cost because transport is a derived demand. Meaning if they need to work, they have to do something to be able to get to their workplace. So buti pang hindi ka kumain basta makapagtrabaho ka. Kasi otherwise, wala ka rin pangkain pag hindi ka nagtrabaho. Yun yung logic of the way of thinking of the poor. So, ang non-quantifiable doon is, during times of financial difficulties, to meet transport requirement, households resort to sacrificing other cost items, no? Such as food, electric and water bills, and healthcare. Kumbaga, nagiging priority expense ang transport cost kasi daily wage sila. Next slide. So primary mobility problem, syempre, expected na yan, it's still the high cost of transport. Everybody cites that. And then yung proposed solution nila, this is a little surprising kasi we were expecting na yung sagot nila dito is more on government to do something. But it turns out na medyo resilient kasi yung poor community natin. So, ang ano nila is they need to work for additional income. So, parang it's still from the part of nung household. It's not really an external help yung hinahanap nila. Now, for the vulnerable groups, typically, they make 4-person trips. Ito sa BPO workers kasi, so we limited our studies sa BPO workers in their going from home to work. No? Yung ibang activities nila, medyo outside muna yun. Parang, so we limited it to the home, work, home trip chain. No? So they make typically 4-person trips. It means hindi siya one ride from their house to the office. Meron siyang somewhere in between. So, let's say from their house to a terminal, and then the return trip is ganun din. So it makes 4-person trips. Now the modal split, you can see here that the jeepney still occupies the highest mode, no? But at this time, mas marami na yung nagmo-motorized transport compared to the poor. And FX medyo mataas. Well, this is it shows na yung choice of mode is dependent on their capability to pay. Parang ganun. Because BPO workers, medyo mga nasa single, sarili nila yung pera nila, wala naman silang pinapag-aral. So mas inaano nila yung comfort when it comes to choosing the mode rather than, they will not sacrifice 20 pesos because of na kesa kung mag-jeep, maglakad ako, mag-FX na lang ako. Parang ganun. So ito, direct cost, yung mga vehicle owners sa kanila spend around 5% of their total income to transport, while the non-vehicle owners spends 13%. And then the non-quantifiable cost is still safety and exposure to pollution. For PWDs, the preferred mode is tricycle taxis and PUJs. Now, if you notice here, these are really general, because kasi si ma'am nagre-react. To tell you frankly, maganda yun, pero I don't think every PWD can really afford that price. No? It's quite... Hindi, ito yung general kasi na maraming... Actually, the reason here is tricycle and taxi are the most available modes. And they provide door-to-door service. So, mas madali nga naman sa kanila kung... yung hirap ng pagbaba sa taxi at pagsakay, minsanan lang kasi nandun na sa tapat ng bahay. Yes, anyway, nakalagay dito na incentives are provided through the Magna Carta for PWDs. No? They are entitled to lower public transport fare. Then, next slide. Now, PWDs, view pedestrian facilities as inadequate in responding to their needs. I think this is obvious. No? It's very hard for people with disabilities to use overpasses, even use the MRT. And next slide. Sa senior citizens, well, still, tricycle taxis and PUJs. Yun yung nagiging preferred mode because of the door-to-door service. And then they are provided with incentives through the expanded Senior Citizens Act. Ito yung 20%. In relation sa PWDs actually and the benefits of senior citizens, at least yung senior citizens are aware dun sa kanilang privilege. Most PWDs in Metro Manila, hindi pa nila alam na they can actually get a PWD card. Then senior citizens, well, it is also, yung pedestrian facilities are also relatively inadequate to meet their needs. No? Yung hard to go up overpasses, etc. Now, for women, we focus really on the relatively lower income na women's group. No? So the preferred mode is still the tricycle, PUJs, and then they walk. No? Because dun sa iba, yung paghahatid ng mga bata. Ito ganun din, it's, women are subject to the same cost as any other regular commuter. So pagdating sa atin, walang discount dun sa women. And issues on pedestrian facilities, especially overpasses. Yung mga location daw, condition, and need for repair, cover, and then yung lack of lights, which is an issue of security, especially at night. Now, these are just general assessment. So, the residents of the study areas find the present public transport system as somehow satisfactory. If you notice, again, I'll reiterate, yung what the basic finding we have, conclusion that we have is, the poor in Metro Manila is parang accepted na nila na kung baga, they find it satisfactory. We're not saying absolutely it's good. What we're saying is, kasi yun lang yung level na accepted na nila. Kung baga, kung hindi ka sanay na naka-aircon, pag nilagyan ka ng electric fan, okay na, di ba? Pero kung natutulog ka araw-araw na naka-aircon, kahit lagyan ka 3 electric fan, sabihin mo, masakit sa katawan. Parang, so relative po yung observation and the assessment. No? Yan, so next slide. So ito, the BPO workers generally view public transport as just right to good because if you notice yung taxis and the FX receive the highest rating, which means kasi they can afford the taxi fare, they can afford the FX fare. And then terminals are generally regarded as accessible, clean, safe, and comfortable. Of course, if you're looking for a taxi, yung terminal niya relatively accessible because sa mga lugar dito, commonly, punta ka lang dyan sa kalsada, may taxi na dyan. No? Hindi naman talaga tayo, we don't require people to walk that long. Then for senior citizens, yung acceptable naman daw, just right in public transport. Although some units are, sinabi there, dilapidated, worn out, and are in poor condition. No? PUJs are the preferred mode due to relatively low price. So they become the preferred mode after tricycles and taxis due to the door-to-door service. And then public transport terminals lack facilities except for terminals of mass transit such as MRT and LRT. So next steps, ito lang. To expand the scope of this study to other Metro Manila areas, come up with a more comprehensive understanding. So because we just gave the baseline, we gave what is happening, how much is the cost, but we did not answer why is this happening, why do they think this way. So that is the next step of the study, which we hope somebody can continue. And to address the mobility of the urban poor and the vulnerable groups in Metro Manila. And the last slide, and that timer says 10 seconds.